Bible Answers with Dr. Al Garza.
All right, welcome back to Bible Answers. I am your host, Dr. Al Garza. So today I'm going to be reviewing a video that I watched by Carlos and Sir Anthony Buzzard regarding John 1:1 and their interpretation of John 1:1 in dealing with pros ton theon, where the word was with God. And I need to say that this is probably one of the worst interpretations that I've seen. One of the worst, not the worst, but probably in the top 5 that I have personally watched. They do a lot of things in the video, or they say a lot of things in the video that are consistent with red herring arguments, as well as misrepresenting what certain words mean, whether it's in Hebrew or Greek. They go beyond what the text is trying to say and add their own interpretation, and they try to use lexicons and things that really doesn't fit the text itself in John 1:1. So they try to deviate with all this red herring that doesn't really relate to what John 1:1 is actually saying, or even from the Hebrew scriptures itself. So I'm going to do a quick review of this, and I'm going to show you a clip of the video where Sir Anthony makes a comment that I'm going to refute. I'm going to refute this strictly from the Hebrew Old Testament and pretty much show where the word, as we know, the word of the Lord, the word of Yahweh, is a separate person from Yahweh himself. Therefore, John is referencing back to the word, who is not only with God. And in the Hebrew New Testament, we have about 10 manuscripts of John. It's next to, beside in Hebrew, azel, which is right there. In other words, it's saying that the word was next to, beside God. In the Greek, of course, it's with. It's in the sense of a prepositional form of proston, with God, face to face with God. And we see this in the New Testament being applied as well. So it's not just some word, thought type of meaning, gospel message or anything that Sir Anthony and Carlos tried to pretend it's saying. This is actually the word who was next to, beside, with, face to face with God, and the God, he was the Word. And this is the same who became flesh. But the question is the word of Yahweh a separate person from the Lord himself? And if we can demonstrate that, then obviously that's what John was referring to. So let's take a look real quick here at one small comment that Sir Anthony makes regarding this. And I'm going to just basically read a passage from the Old Testament so you can see that this is refuting what they're saying.
To think of the word as what it always meant in the Old Testament, not a person. And what it means in the New Testament is not just the Bible, by the way. One of the great errors I would like to correct is that the Word of God simply means the Bible. It doesn't.
So the first point I want to reference here is this point where he talks about is never a person. That's important.
It always meant in the Old Testament of the Word. Very much easier is to think of the word as what it always meant in the Old Testament, not a person.
Not a person. Now, he's playing a semantic game here. He's talking about the word davar in Hebrew, and he says, look at the lexicons. It always means speech, language, this, that. But he ignores the fact that we're not referring to just the word, or davar in Hebrew. We're talking about davar Yahweh in a construct form, that this is the word of the Lord, the word Yahweh, which again relates that the word is God and God is the word in that sense, or the Lord or Yahweh is the word and the word is Yahweh. It's in a construct form in Hebrew, and it reflects that they are one and the same. It's just a different title. So the question is, do we find in the Old Testament a reference to the word of the Lord separate and distinct from the Lord himself? And that is key, because that will refute everything that they're saying here, regardless of how you then want to try and interpret it or eisegete it all you want. If we can demonstrate that, then the argument's over. So turn, and let's look at this carefully at 1 Kings 19, where Elijah goes to the mountain of God, goes to a cave, and he encounters two separate individuals at the cave. So let's look at verse 9 of 1 Kings 19. It says, this is interesting, it says, "Then Elijah came to the cave and lodged there." Basically, he was going to spend the night there. "And behold, the word of the Lord came to him and said to him," this is the word of the Lord who now comes to Elijah at the cave, and in the cave where he's going to spend the night there. And the word of the Lord comes to him and speaks to him and says, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Remember that question. What are you doing here, Elijah? That question comes from the word of the Lord. And Elijah said, "I have been very zealous for Yahweh, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword, and I am alone am left, and they seek my life." So Elijah is addressing the word of the Lord in the sense of saying, your covenant, your altar, and your prophets, these things have happened to them, to the word of the Lord. What does the word of the Lord say? So the word of the Lord said, "Go forth and stand on the mountain before Yahweh." And behold, Yahweh was passing by. So think about that. The word of the Lord tells Elijah to go stand before the Lord. And as he tells him that, the Lord is passing by. These are not the same persons. This is the word of the Lord speaking to Elijah. Elijah addressing him as the word of the Lord, as the Lord himself. And then the word of the Lord tells him to go stand before the Lord. And as he tells him that, the Lord is passing by. What happens? Well, after Elijah hears the strong wind and hears the earthquake, and of course the fire, which the Lord is in neither one of those, he hears a soft whisper or a soft sound, a low sound. In the Hebrew, it's basically a low whisper. So Elijah goes out to the front of the cave. It says right here, "And behold," it says, "when Elijah heard, he wrapped his face and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave." So he was in the cave with the word of the Lord. And as he hears these things, after the word of the Lord instructs him to go stand before the Lord, he goes out to the entrance of the cave. And this is what happens. "And behold, a voice came to Elijah and said, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?'" The same question that the word of the Lord asked Elijah is now asked again by the Lord himself. These are not the same persons. This is the Lord separate from the word of the Lord, who now asks Elijah the same question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And listen to what Elijah says. "I have been zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the sons of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left, and they seek my life." So the same conversation, the same response Elijah gives to the Lord that he spoke and told the word of the Lord. These are not the same persons. There's no way around this. This is what the Unitarians like Carlos and Sir Anthony will never answer. If you give them this question and you try and get an answer, they do a red herring. They jump off to other passages in the Old Testament or the New Testament. They say, "Oh, well, what about this? And what about that? Well, when this. In other words, it's a red herring. It's the biggest fallacy they commit all the time. They won't address the verses or the passages here in 1 Kings 19. They can't, because it refutes everything they say about who the Word is. And in this context, it's the word of the Lord speaking to Elijah, having a conversation, and then the word telling him to go stand before the Lord, who is passing by at that moment. And Elijah goes to the cave entrance, and then the Lord asks him the same question, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And Elijah responds the exact same way he just said to the word of the Lord. If you can't see the distinction between the word of the Lord and the Lord himself here in Elijah 19, then you are just fooling yourself, you're deceiving yourself, and you're lying to people when you say that the word is never a person in the sense of being the word of Yahweh in a construct form. We're not talking about the word itself, how it's used in the Old Testament, just devoted by itself. We're not talking about, we're talking about when it's used in a construct form with Yahweh himself, the word of Yahweh. This is the clearest verse. Besides this, of course, you have the word of the Lord who appears to Abraham in Genesis 15. But this is a clear distinction between both the word of the Lord and the Lord himself. There's no way around it. So they are very ignorant of this, or they're being very dishonest about what is taught in the Old Testament regarding the word of the Lord and the Lord. I mean, this is a gross rendering of John 1:1. This is why John says, in the beginning, he was the Word, or was the Word. And the Word was with, beside, next to face with God. And the God, he was the Word. That's how it reads not only in the Greek, but also in the Hebrew New Testament manuscripts we have of John, which are about 10 of them. And they affirm the personage of the Word of the Lord as the Word. And you see this all throughout the Old Testament and even in the New. Again, this is a gross representation of what the Word is when it's in a construct form with the word of the Lord. I don't know what, I mean, it blows me away how they can sit there and deceive and manipulate the text of John 1:1 and ignore things like 1 Kings 19. So I hope this really it clears things up. This is refuting what they're saying, and there's no way around it. Again, these are Unitarian heresy teachings about John 1:1 and not understanding how the Word is the word of the Lord in the Old Testament, a separate and distinct person from the Lord himself. And that's the same Lord, the same Word who became flesh and tabernacled among his people and became Yeshua Jesus. So I hope this helps. I hope this helps clarify and gives you better understanding of who the word of the Lord is in regards to John 1:1 and in 1 Kings 19. I want to say thank you for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, share. If you have any questions or comments, you can go here and leave them here at the bottom, or you can go to my website, drlgarza.org, where you can give a donation, help with the New Testament Manuscript Research Translation Project. You can email me there. You can pick up a lot of my books like One Trinity, where I deal with this, or one of my best-selling books is More Than a Rabbi, The Word Who Became Flesh. You can pick that up where I deal with this extensively as well as in my book. So I want to say thank you for watching, and God bless.
Bible Answers with Dr. Al Garza.